Hi everyone. Chapter 3 is called Seek High Ground. It doesn't look like a day for a huge disaster, said Annie. Outside the cafe, people were clinging to their windblown umbrellas, but no one looked scared. Some even laughed as a man chased his cowboy hat down the sidewalk. At the cafe counter, a policeman was eating a sandwich and joking with a waitress. He didn't seem worried. No one seemed worried. Customers were cheerfully chatting with each other or reading newspapers. What does the newspaper say? Asked Annie. I'll check, said Jack. He jumped up and grabbed a copy of the Galveston Daily News from an empty table. He sat back down and scanned the front page. Near the bottom was a small headline, Storm in the Gulf. Listen, Jack said to Annie, and he read aloud. The awaited Gulf storm has moved north over Cuba. The Weather Bureau reports no new information about the storm's movements. Most likely, it changed course before reaching Texas. Jack put the paper down. That is so wrong, he said. It's heading straight for Galveston. I don't get it, said Annie. Why don't they know that a terrible hurricane is coming? I guess because in 1900 they didn't have radar or satellites, said Jack. They didn't have computers or TV or weather apps or... Okay, got it, said Annie. Jack picked up the book again. His heart was racing as he read aloud. On September 8th, Galveston was completely unprepared for a terrible hurricane. For 8 hours, raging winds and water rushed across the island. Thousands of lives were lost in the storm surge. Thousands of lives? That is terrible, said Annie. What is a storm surge? That's when high winds push the ocean water over the land, Jack said. He kept reading. Seawater from both the Gulf and the bay covered the whole island. Those who fled to higher ground had a better chance of surviving. Many found safety in tall, sturdy buildings, such as the Tremont House Hotel and the Ursuline Academy. Morgan's message makes perfect sense now, said Annie. We have to help people. We literally have to tell them to seek high ground now and do not delay. She turned back to the elderly couple at the next table. Excuse me, but we have information that a powerful hurricane is coming here today, she said. Everyone needs to seek high ground. Or go to the Tremont House, Jack said, or the Ursuline Academy. The woman smiled at them. You're both so sweet, wanting to help everyone. We're expecting a bad storm, but not a hurricane, she said. She's right, the man said, and we're used to bad storms here. That's why many of our houses are raised up on pillars. It keeps the floodwaters from coming in. Jack just nodded. Okay, thanks, he said. He didn't know what else to do. He couldn't show them the book from the future. Jack, we have to tell someone in charge, Annie said. How about the policeman? He could be the one to warn everyone. Okay, said Jack. Jack put their Texas book into his backpack. Annie grabbed their umbrella and they hurried over to the policeman. Excuse me, sir, said Annie. We have reliable information that Galveston is about to have the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. That's right, sir, said Jack, trying to sound calm. Everyone needs to seek higher ground or find shelter in tall, sturdy buildings. The jolly-looking policeman grinned. And where did you get your information? He asked. Someone told us, said Jack. Someone really smart. Well, shame on them for scaring you, the policeman said. I spoke to our local weatherman this morning, and he said we're going to have strong winds and some bad rain, but nothing more. But he's wrong, sir, said Annie. We're telling you the facts. I don't want you to worry, little girl, the policeman said kindly. Why don't you go have fun with all the young folks down on the strand? They're having a grand time watching the big waves rolling in. I was just down there. Annie whirled to Jack. The strand, she said, that's the lowest ground. Oh no, said Jack, we have to warn them. Thanks for the tip, Annie said to the policeman, and then she and Jack raced out into the driving rain. Water was rushing down the sidewalk. Jack struggled to open their huge umbrella, but the wind yanked it from his hands, and so he carried it down the block. There goes our umbrella, said Jack. That's okay, said Annie. We're already soaking wet anyway. With the rain pounding down, Jack and Annie started down 25th Street toward the Strand. "The storm's getting bad," shouted Annie. "And it's getting a lot worse," said Jack. The wind pushed them down the street to the waterfront. Clam shacks, candy stores, and gift shops lined the boardwalk along the Strand. A crowd of sightseers, young and old, stood on the beach, cheering the huge waves. The waves hit a long pier, and seawater shot into the air. The water splashed against the bathhouses on the pier, where swimmers changed their clothes in the sunny weather. Annie and Jack dashed across the Strand to the beach. "Listen, everyone," shouted Annie. "You're all in danger. A huge storm surge is coming. Leave the beach." "Run to high ground," shouted Jack. "Now! Now!" "Uptown," yelled Annie. "Go uptown now!" Jack and Annie both yelled as loudly as they could, but no one seemed to hear them over the roar of the waves. Jack moved closer to the crowd. "Listen, everyone," he yelled. "A terrible storm is coming. The worst natural disaster in U.S. history." "Jack!" Annie screamed. "Jack, look! The storm surge!" Jack turned around. Out at sea, the waves were gigantic. The storm surge had begun. Chapter 4 is called The Flood. The giant waves slammed over the pier. They completely destroyed the bathhouses. Their broken wooden planks crashed into the sea. The people on the beach screamed. They tried to flee from the incoming waves. Jack and Annie ran with the crowd of people across the Strand to the boardwalk. The surging waves rolled after them. Seawater swept over the beach and across the Strand. It covered the boardwalk and flooded the shops. Jack and Annie began wading with the crowd up 25th Street. The water was knee-deep and it was rising fast. People rushed out of the flooded stores and houses. They carried pets, children, and suitcases. They joined the others heading toward higher ground. Jack saw a toddler slip from a man's shoulders into the churning seawater. Jack grabbed the boy and pulled him out of the water. "Thank you," the boy's father cried. "Are you alone? Do you need help?" "No thanks," shouted Jack. "Buddy! Bailey!" a girl screamed. Her two small dogs had slipped out of a basket. Jack and Annie scooped up the dogs before the water could sweep them away, and they carried them back to the girl. "Thank you," she cried as she handed her the trembling dogs. "Help!" someone yelled. An old man was clinging to a lamppost, fighting the wind. Jack and Annie each put an arm around him. He pointed to a young woman, and Jack and Annie helped him wade through the water to her. "Thank you," the woman yelled. "Do you need help?" "We're fine," said Annie. Jack and Annie forged on through the wind, rain, and rising seawater, helping anyone they could. Roof shingles and tiles flew off of houses. Shutters flew off of windows. A fierce gust of wind knocked Jack and Annie over. They fell into the floodwater. They struggled to get back on their feet, and they fell again, and they got up again. They used all their strength to keep moving. The street was like a river now. The seawater was above their waists and still rising. "Avenue L," shouted Jack, pointing at a sign. "That's where the treehouse is. It's a safe place to be for now." "Okay," said Annie. "We can climb up and figure out how to be more helpful." As others kept moving up 25th Street, Jack and Annie turned onto Avenue L. The avenue was flooded now, too. They pushed past barrels, boards, and branches. Wreckage floated everywhere. "There's the fence," said Annie. The top of the iron fence barely showed above the floodwater. The blue house was still standing. The tree house was still in the oak tree. Jack and Annie hauled themselves over the iron fence and swam toward the oak. They grabbed low branches and clung to them. Jack looked around. The rope ladder was missing. "It's up there," said Annie. The wind had blown the ladder over a branch. It was much too high to reach. As Jack and Annie clung to the tree, lightning flashed in the sky and thunder boomed. More wreckage floated past, shingles, shutters, and fence posts. A big wooden door crashed into the tree trunk, barely missing Jack and Annie. "We've got to get away from here," yelled Jack, "before we get hit by lightning or something crushes us." "Look, someone's waving," cried Annie, "from the porch of the blue house." A tall, thin woman was calling to them from her dry porch. The woman held up a coil of rope. She beckoned to Jack and Annie and shouted. Jack couldn't understand her words. "She wants to help us," said Annie. She waved back at the woman. The woman threw the rope out to them. The end floated on the water near the oak tree. Annie plunged into the floodwaters. Jack followed her. They both grabbed the rope. The water now was up to their necks. They held the rope tightly to keep from being swept away by the current. The woman on the porch pulled them toward the house. Hanging onto the rope, Jack and Annie slowly plowed through the water. When they reached the steps, they dragged themselves up to the porch. The woman dropped the rope and opened her front door. "Come in," she cried. She pulled Jack and Annie into her house. Then she slammed the door against the storm.